You are listening to 95.7 FM WELT, Fort Wayne, Radioactive. The opinions and views expressed in this show are those of the hosts and guests only. They do not represent those of FreeThought Fort Wayne, WELT, or any other organization. Welcome to the Hoosier Humanist Hour, where we explore science, religion, culture, ethics, and community from the humanist perspective. Join us as we discuss those topics and more, free from the ideologies of religion and superstition.
Hello and welcome to another fine hour of the Hoosier Humanist Hour. As usual, this show is put together by the members of FreeThought Fort Wayne. If anybody's interested in our group, you can find us at facebook.com/FreeThoughtFW, or our email address is fortwayneaha@gmail.com. I think we have a great show for you today. We have a new host, Caleb. And we have everyone else. We got Chris, D, and myself, V, and Andrew, our sound engineer. We've got some good topics today. We're going to talk a little bit about what's it like, around the holidays when you believe differently from the rest of your family. Maybe you consider yourself an atheist, agnostic, and your family is probably all Christian. So, there may be some interesting navigation you have to do there. And also have another topic. Recently, Knightstown in Indiana had to remove a rather large cross from the top of their Christmas tree. And it sounds like, sometimes these things happen around the holidays, or, these kind of religious symbols have been torn down in the past from, public lands for various reasons. So just an interesting thing to talk about there. So with that, let's get going. How's everybody doing?
Great.
I'm great. Fantastic, man.
Yeah, good. Well, let's start with the holidays. By the time this show airs, it'll be a few days after Christmas. But it's still worth mentioning it. I don't know. Me personally, my family is not very religious, so I don't necessarily have to navigate much of anything. But what has everybody else's experience been? When you're around religious family, what do you guys avoid? What do you do? How do you handle yourself? Participate in prayer, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I do not do any more of that, but I think my situation's pretty easy. We just have decided to not talk about it at all, so nobody brings it up, and we have a wonderful time.
That's good.
But we don't really talk about any of the religious portions of it. It does get a little bit weird when there's like prayer, because I don't, close my eyes or anything like that. I kind of stare at everybody like, this is kind of cool. I used to believe this stuff. But there is a weird part from my particular experience. Sometimes the religion that I grew up in and my parents still believe in, people would speak in tongues.
Oh, wow.
So you would call on different people to speak in tongues. So I always wonder what would happen if they called me to do that again, which they never would. But if they did, it would just be really interesting, being like, I can't do it. Sorry. Just ruin the whole evening.
Oh, man. I'm sure you can take it.
Does that include speaking snake?
Apparently it was the tongues of men or angels. I don't think snake was included in that.
Practice your parcel mouth.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for. Yeah.
Man, how about D? You have kids. How do you do you try to do anything special about your kids, anything like that?
Well, my oldest daughter really is getting into it really bothers me. She goes to school, and twice now they've convinced her that the gingerbread man exists, and that her teacher's doing an elf on a shelf. So now my daughter thinks that there's an elf staring at her. But, only moves when you're not looking at it. She's convinced.
Right.
And I keep trying to tell her, you do tell me that, you are trying to tell me that a cookie is walking around, with the gingerbread man cookie. She's like,
right.
Yeah. To her, it still makes sense that a cookie could be alive. But as far as Christmas goes, she brings up Santa Claus every once in a while, but she hasn't really latched on to it, mainly because she's never gotten a present from Santa Claus. So
Oh, I see.
every present comes from relatives or friends. So Santa Claus isn't really relevant to her happiness.
Yeah, my 5-year-old has had arguments with other students at school about the existence of Santa Claus. Like, he does not believe in Santa Claus. He knows he's not real.
Right.
So yeah, he's had arguments.
Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy.
About whether or not we were going to teach Devin that Santa Claus was a real thing or just something that people do for fun on the holidays. We're still having that conversation. We haven't quite figured it out. Devin's young enough where he's only not even 2 years old yet, so it's not something that we have to be concerned about. But I don't know. What's your guys' take on that? I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of torn because I feel like I'm lying to him by telling him that Santa's real. I don't know. I've ever since I became an atheist and started taking this seriously, I've had a disdain really for teaching children false things, and I don't really know how to feel about Santa Claus per se or the Easter Bunny or any of those.
Yeah, what my wife and I did with our two boys is basically just let them figure it out for themselves. They asked us, is Santa Claus real, or do you think mommy and daddy give you presents? And they like, because we've never tried to force anything on them, that we've just always let them make up their own mind about things, and they decided no, Santa Claus wasn't real. And it was just that. They're awesome. Like, they're 5 years old and they're already so skeptical.
Wow,
that's great.
I'm not getting that from mine.
No, go ahead.
I'm gonna say I'm not getting that from mine at all. At least my oldest, she's like, man, she's falling for stuff hook, line, and sinker. And I kind of approach it as like, I refuse to indoctrinate my children. So when she comes up believing something that I know is ridiculous, I just say, oh, that's interesting. And I ask her questions about it. And I say, that seems kind of weird for these reasons. And if she pushes me for an opinion on it, I tell her that I don't believe it or whatever. Even like the gingerbread man, I was like, well, you're talking about a walking cookie. How is that possible? But she still latches onto it, but I'm not like too worried about it. I mean, I feel like if I force her to change or do something like that could be just as harmful. I don't want her to believe anything, whether it's right or wrong, without some sort of thought behind it. So that's my thinking on it.
Yeah, because I know every year he's going to be getting presents from Santa. That's something that Grandma and Grandpa love to do.
Really?
I even still get presents from Santa.
Wow.
Everybody does. If it comes from Grandma and Grandpa, unless you got two, it came from Santa.
That's awesome. That's committed to the Santa thing right there.
Oh.
For you still, too?
Every family is the same thing.
Have you told them that you don't believe in Santa yet? Have they?
I don't know if I want to crush them like that.
You're right.
Built up such a fan for this, and it's not hurting anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah,
I don't know. One thing that I heard about that I really liked, that somebody had brought up about gifts from Santa. There's all kinds, especially when like large gatherings of family get together, and that's when gifts are being exchanged, and in other kind of larger settings. I think that's a really good thing to do, is to make the gifts from Santa the less expensive gifts, as opposed to the more expensive gifts. That way, no kid thinks that Santa likes them more or less because of the value of their present. If you're going to have like really expensive presents, make them from the parents or from the grandparents or aunts and uncles, kind of thing. I don't know. What do you guys think of that kind of logic?
No, I've definitely contemplated Santa economics before. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my parents used to save the most expensive present that was from Santa for some reason.
Oh wow, totally the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, it's a nice kind of way of easing kids out of it, I guess.
Yeah.
If they're really into it, and like the worst presents, the underwear always comes from Santa. It's going to make it easy for them to like detach from that view. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I don't have kids, but to me, I don't know. It seems to me that it's okay to, let the kids have that fantasy, because I think it helps kids to kind of develop a little more of an imagination, and it's kind of a fun thing to do, to pretend that Santa is there. And kids read stories, and you read stories to them and books and things like that, and it's it's kind of how they learn to distinguish what's real and what's not real, and that sometimes stories are just stories and stuff like that. Now, there's the factor of crushing them when they find out that, as my nieces recently found out that Santa isn't real, and apparently one of my nieces was just crying her eyes out in school because she found out in the morning just before school. So, there's that aspect to it, but I think it's not unhealthy to teach kids about Santa.
I don't necessarily think that the soul-crushing aspect of it is all that bad either in and of itself. I actually think that can be enlightening. I kind of agree with Lawrence Krauss on this. He's an advocate for this saying that he hopes that everybody has a worldview of theirs, an important personal worldview of theirs, get completely crumbled.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I actually agree with that. I've had that happen a lot over the last couple of years, and it blows my mind every time it happens, and it changes me, and it's always for the better.
Yeah. Well, the thing is like, if you take away all of the like standard illusions today, like most religion and that sort of stuff, what do they have to break out of when they get older? I often wonder about that. Like, for me personally, it took the breaking out of superstition to like wake me up. And I could totally see how you could be not in, the mainstream religions or really any kind of superstition or belief without evidence, and then just have nothing to wake up from. Like, I wonder if you're still, as I guess you would say, enlightened. I hate to use that word, but just to be skeptical and critical on how to examine an argument. Like, can that be taught from a childbirth, or is it something that you have to experience from waking up from some of your illusions?
That's an excellent question. I'm leaning more towards the latter on that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, me too.
Especially like you guys were discussing earlier about the imagination aspect of it. I am kind of curious if I did teach my son in like Vulcan way, if he really would grow up to be almost Vulcan-like.
I think evidence strongly points that he would. You really could have some fun with kids if you could just make them believe the craziest stuff and screw them up totally if you wanted to, right? Oh, that would be heartbreaking to watch.
Well, don't do that. Don't screw up.
Yeah. I would never do that.
Don't teach them any nonsense.
Somebody who actually thinks that they're Vulcan.
Oh, man. Yeah, you probably could. I mean... But that actually, it applies to grown-ups as well. I mean, look at how some people, when they're not applying critical thinking, that they didn't learn as kids, they fall prey to cults sometimes, and all these, look at, well, I hate to throw this example in there, but like jihadists, they fall prey to authority, to figures in power, to stuff like that, and they can be manipulated to do a lot. Where if you grew up skeptical and you learn to distinguish all those things, and it'd be much harder to fall prey to some of that stuff.
Yeah.
So
I was just watching some documentaries and doing some research on India and the caste system. And, when we think about the caste system, we think about, how awful that is. Like these, the people who are lucky enough to be in the higher caste just oppress the lower ones, and they can never break free, and they must hate it. And I think that from what I'm garnering, from what I'm learning here, it's like the lower classes, they do hate it, but they believe in it just as much as the upper class castes do. So there's no breaking the chains that bind them through logic. It's all faith-based. Superstitiously based on both the upper and lower ends of the castes. Like, how do you break that when both the oppressor and the oppressed want the system?
Well, you can see the same thing in Islamic women, right?
Yeah, I guess
where,
so.
as much as you feel like you need to liberate them and tell them, hey, you don't have to cover every inch of your body except for your eyes and your hands. Some of them resist because they honestly believe that their place is, in the home, following exactly what the man says and being submissive to his every will, while covering every part of their body, basically. So, yeah, it's a two-way street.
Yeah, I don't have much of a problem with that when they want it, but the problem comes when somebody doesn't want it and they're forced into it.
Well, the problem is that the brainwashing behind it really kind of, wishy-washy's the whole line between do they really want it or are they just kind of, brought up in this tradition, and their brain is just wired that way.
Yeah, it's very hard. It kind of goes towards how we reason as people. And this is something that I was talking with my girlfriend a few days ago, is oftentimes we feel a certain way, and then we find a justification for why we feel that way instead of the other way around. So, if a woman thinks that, she's been brought up this way and thinks that she needs to cover herself up, head to toe, it's hard to break out of that because her reasoning is completely backwards, and she finds reasons to justify that behavior instead of trying to determine the right behavior first of all, based on reason and logic. But we have strayed from the holidays. So let me ask you guys another question about the holidays, since we're on the topic. You guys decorate for Christmas? Do you put up a Christmas tree? All that kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
I put a unicorn head at the top of my tree, though. It's the only difference.
Is it named Charlie?
We've never named it, but I'll bring that up at the next family meeting. That might stick.
Gotcha.
I don't know how that tradition got started, but I really like it. The kids hate it.
Oh.
I like seeing that unicorn head up there. It's funny.
Well, the funny thing is, none of the decorations and the gift giving and all that is really a Christian tradition. It's much more based on pagan rituals from well before Christianity and all that. I think we mentioned it on the previous show. Also, in some parts of the world, they put the Yule log in the fireplace and let it burn overnight. And the Yule part is the actual god that I used to celebrate. And back in my home country, people did that as well, and it was considered to be the Christian tradition and the Christian thing to do. But it really isn't. It's based on something that Christianity adopted and Christian people adopted.
From the Norse.
Yes.
Christmas itself is just, Christians put so much importance on it, but there's nothing about it that makes any sense. Like in regards to Christianity, like the ornaments on the tree, the date, the time of the year. I mean, it's all kind of it's really weird, but nobody puts any thought into it.
And that's the thing. I was sitting here talking about it with my wife, and we came to the decision that really the only stuff that is Christian about Christmas is the nativity.
Yes.
Everything associated with the nativity is about it.
Yeah.
Every single other thing is completely Germanic or pagan or Norse or a product of American authors.
Yeah, I know. It's really funny.
I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine from elementary school. He ended up becoming a Mormon pastor, believe it or not. We still keep in touch. And he was discussing on Facebook about how Christmas is stuck in the Victorian era. And I actually had a conversation with him. He's not wrong. The modern interpretation, the way that it's celebrated today, mostly comes from that era. Those people like Charles Dickens and Queen Victoria that really made it what it is today. I was explaining to him that actually for the vast majority of history, Christmas by Christians was celebrated as a carousing holiday, kind of like how Halloween is celebrated today. They would go about in the streets. It was a this kind of festival kind of thing, and the Puritans actually banned the holiday. They considered it too hectic, too crazy, a little bit too party-esque, if you will. And like I said, it wasn't until the Victorian era when it evolved to what it is today. And he didn't actually know any of that. It kind of surprised me. I figured they teach the stuff in seminary.
Oh, go figure.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, I think
the Mormon. He's a Mormon minister, or what did he do?
Minister. I honestly can't remember what title he goes.
Well,
by.
I mean, I would say Christmas is probably the least of their worries with their history of what they believe.
I honestly don't talk to him about religion very often.
Huh?
Wow. I thought that I read somewhere that actually celebrating Christmas used to be banned in the U.S. Not just by the Puritans, but just like almost like a government ban on celebrating Christmas used to be in place.
In Massachusetts, that was absolutely
was it?
true. Yeah, it was 1659 through 1681 when that particular thing was banned.
Wow.
Why? Do we know why?
Because of exactly what Caleb said. Because the Pilgrims were absolutely against it. They saw it as a very pagan holiday. Because guess what? It kind of is. They had no interest in being associated with it. Not to mention, it was kind of a figure of the old country, so to speak. It was something that was celebrated in Great Britain. So they kind of had nothing to do with it, which is why Christmas also fell out of favor during the American Revolution in the end of the 1700s, just because of that exact reason. Because, hey, screw the English and everything that's associated with them.
Huh? That's
Wow.
interesting. Well, I really like it. It's fun.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I think it's perfectly fine as a atheist, agnostic, humanist, or whatever you identify with to celebrate Christmas, have fun with it, exchange the presents and all that, despite of what Christians like to say and accuse us of and all these other things. So.
Yeah, absolutely. The latest Pew polls actually say that roughly 18% of people in America who celebrate Christmas aren't even Christian.
Really? That's awesome.
Wonderful.
Well, Christianity's brought us so much awful stuff. And there's some good stuff too. I would consider Christmas one of those things. I'll take it.
Yeah. Well, I think according to that those same religious surveys and stuff, only 70% of people in the U.S. identify as Christians. So there's 30% of people that do not identify as Christian. They identify as something else. So, and 30%, that's a pretty healthy chunk of people. And yeah, I can see most of them celebrating Christmas, if for no other reason than because it's a holiday and you're off work and it gives you time to gather with family and all that. I mean, that's important too.
There's lots of candy. It's always a good incentive.
Yeah, those same Pew polls say that roughly 11% of the people that they polled, again, roughly only about 11% of them said that they were excited for the religious aspects of Christmas, whereas 80-some-odd% were most excited for the presents and the fun with family.
Cool.
I think I fall into that 80 percentile.
Yeah. I mean, I can't really see, anybody really like under 40 being like, yay, I get to go to church at midnight or something, Like I can't see that happening. Even if I was Christian, You
ever been to church before?
I haven't. No.
Ghost town. There's
Really?
there.
Wow.
As far as I'm aware, I think most churches actually close down. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure most churches actually close. I think there's a lot of Catholic churches I know that do like midnight masses and things like that, but there's just nobody that shows up. But a lot of churches still want to try and have that at Christmas service, but nobody shows up, and I find that incredibly ironic.
I think I've heard of that too. I vaguely remember hearing something like that. Yeah, wow, that's awesome. Well, do we want to switch to our other subject of the evening?
Sure.
The Knightstown or the...
Yeah, the Knightstown. Yeah. So let me just kind of throw something out there to begin the discussion. So Knightstown is about 40 miles east of Indianapolis, and the ACLU sued the town because on, basically what's government property, with city property, they had a large Christmas tree, and on top of that, there was a rather large cross, and one of the people in the town, through the ACLU, sued the town to have that cross removed. And unfortunately, the article that I'm looking at is from Indy Star, and they only have a very, very small picture of what that Christmas tree looks like, but it is pretty tall. I mean, that's easily a 30-foot tree, probably. So that cross on top is, easily 3-4 feet tall. So it's not a small cross. Maybe more than that, depending on the perspective of the picture. So a rather large cross on top of that tree. So what do you guys think of that? I mean, it kind of goes towards similar things have happened, in other places with other Christian symbols and that. But, are you guys okay with these things? Are you not? Like, why are you okay? Why are you not okay with, having these religious symbols on city property?
Well, I just want to ask the question here real quick. First off, are we sure that it was a cross and not just a plus sign? Yeah.
It was a big lowercase t.
Oh, okay, gotcha. For tree, that's right. That's right, for tree.
Yeah, they're labeling the tree.
Didn't even think about that.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, from what I can tell, the cross doesn't have, well, I mean, again, it's a very, very small picture, but doesn't have a Jesus on it, spread apart. So you could argue that it's a lowercase t,
The first thing that came to my mind reading the story is like, why do they draw the line at the cross? Like, isn't the whole thing just like a bunch of weird religious, superstitious nonsense? So like, you ban the tree next, and I guess it's all about like what's on public property, right?
Exactly.
But why does the tree make it there and not like? Well, I mean, don't other religions not celebrate Christmas, right?
Well, they do.
Well, we already determined that the Christmas tree is actually pagan. So
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Anymore, the general consensus, at least in the what I've heard in the United States, or the basically Western world, is the tree itself is kind of secular. Like, everyone claims the tree because it's just that old. That
I think it's mostly due that we don't know the true roots. There's speculation, but nobody
knows
where the tree comes from. So it is, in my mind, I honestly think that puts it under the secular category.
Well, yeah, there were a number of different cultures that did it. That's why it's kind of vague, because the Egyptians did it, the Vikings did it, the Romans did it. Everybody seemed to use some sort of tree to celebrate the winter solstice, just as a reminder of the upcoming spring, that, hey, things may be dark and gloomy now, but look at the green that we might have here again in the next few months. So that's kind of why.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't know if it said it in the story or not, but was the cross like something the city put up itself?
Yes.
Okay, so it wasn't just like they were letting anyone put stuff out?
Yeah, no, the tree itself was actually centered in the town square. The man that actually filed the suit was Joseph Tompkins. He's quoted as saying that he objects to any of his tax dollars going to pay for the erection or maintenance of the display, or even the lighting of it. And I honestly have to, I concur 100%. I mean, those are tax dollars going towards some Christian ideology of some kind, and I find no reason to object to that. The the Knightstown officials barely even attempted to fight this. They outright just let the case drop for the most part, or settle for the most part.
So are they taking down the whole tree then? Or is just taking down the cross enough? Or the plus sign? Not sure.
Honestly, I don't know if they're taking down the whole tree. I would assume it is just the cross, though.
I'm pretty sure it's just the cross. Yeah.
So here's a question, just to finalize that topic. What does belong on the top of a Christmas tree?
This is a trick question.
I'm sorry. I grew up with putting a star on the top of a tree, and honestly, I think a star is appropriate because you have the pine tree, and in the back of the pine tree, in the sky, you have stars. So, I mean, that makes sense to me, but obviously there's a North Star kind of religious component to that. So that's why I'm asking, because honestly, I'm comfortable with the star because I think it looks cool.
Yeah, that's what I grew up with a star on top of the tree, and that's what I still do. So
yeah, same here. We've always put stars on our tree, and I've always been fine with it. So, pretty much anybody, I guess, could make any symbol into a religious symbol. But to me, it's like, okay, a star is sufficiently secular. It's actually a real thing. It exists. It's just a representation of something. I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, I guess the only issue that I have is with my grandma, who puts a fiber optic angel onto the top of the tree. That's where we start having some issues.
Yeah. Well, obviously, an angel would definitely be a Christian symbol. So it would be the same argument with an angel or a cross, at least in my opinion.
Is this like what atheists are going to argue about in 100 years? Like, I'm offended by what you've put on top of that tree. It should be more secular, a star.
Pretty good.
What'd you say? Yeah. And 100, mark my words, guys, 100 years from now, people are going to be like, do you put the star or the unicorn on your tree? They're going to be discussing which one they like the best.
Well, I don't know if you guys heard about this particular part of the story. Fox 59 reported that as an interesting maneuver, the townsfolk who wanted to get the cross back, they actually rallied together and openly prayed for Joseph, the guy that started this whole ball, or got the whole ball rolling. And they were also praying for his father, who was battling cancer. And they were doing, I'm assuming, to show their Christian generosity and forgiveness. But, I don't know, maybe it's just a hunch, but somehow I doubt that these religious platitudes are going to have the desired effect that they're looking for. But I don't know. I mean, how do you guys feel about that?
I think if I put a sock on my foot, you might be cured of cancer. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, 50-50, right?
Right.
Not really.
That's where everybody says, thank you, Chris. But when they hang up the phone, they're like, Chris is putting a sock on his foot to cure my cancer. Like, I love the guy. He's a nice guy, but that's weird.
I'm a generous dude.
I pretty much look at the prayer and all that stuff the same way now.
Yeah.
It just, I don't know. It just irritates me because he's obviously fighting against having this religion forced throat with his own tax money, and yet they want to publicly get together and pray for the man and his father, who's battling cancer. And if I was him, I'd be extremely annoyed, quite frankly.
If I was him, I would ask for a donation. I would start a Kickstarter campaign and stand in front of the crowd of people and just, give them my Kickstarter and be like, hey, you know what? If you, instead of praying, why don't you throw a couple dollars, Don't waste the gas to gather, whatever gas money you would have, just to come to you would have expended just to come to the town square, just throw the gas money into the Kickstarter.
Like a plate to the town hall tree.
I accept my goodwill in cash only, please. Thank you.
Yes.
No, that's the terrible thing about church, man. It demands prayers and an offering. Like, come on, Kickstarter at least just goes for the offering. You don't have to pray.
They want their money.
Oh, God, when I think about how much money I tithed, breaks my heart. What a waste.
I know people that, donate 10% out of their paycheck just directly goes to the church.
That's what I did for a long time.
Wow.
10%. And then if you gave more, you would get even more blessings from God. So I would frequently go over.
Wow. Wow.
I don't know where the line stopped, but somewhere at 100%, and they wouldn't accept any more than that.
Did you guys ever have conflicts at home because of that? My dad and my stepmom, for example, they used to bicker about this because my stepmom was very adamant about that 10% tithe, and sometimes that 10% was pushing them into the red a little bit.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen not full-blown arguments and fights, but I've seen some pretty good confrontation at home because of this tithing issue. I don't know. I just don't know how common something like that is out there.
I experienced it, and tithing was like necessary. If you weren't tithing, then you would have been basically gotten rid of, more or less, if you did it long enough. Not killed. You just wouldn't be allowed to be part of that church or that cult. So the thinking, I think, is similar for people who are like really adamant about it. So they just think that they're not going, for us, it was like totally based on fear. Like if you weren't tithing, you were like opening up yourself to like the devil doing something terrible to you. So it was motivated more out of fear, I think, than actual compassion or love. But
well, isn't that the whole reason to become Christian in the first place? Is that a fear?
Apparently, yes.
There's certainly a fear component to it. Do you guys ever watch Last Week Tonight with John Oliver?
Yeah.
He did a thing on churches, so I'm more okay with the donation of, if you want to donate money to the church, if you think that does any good, it's up to you, your money, do whatever you want with it. Taxes. What I'm not okay with is, when John Oliver had gotten in touch with this church and, they were exchanging letters back and forth and they were asking for money. So he sent them a couple bucks and they send them money back and they asked for more money. And that was supposed to, build up your, I don't even know how to say it, like your goodwill with God. And like the more you gave, the more good was going to come your way. Like that is the total scam that irritates me probably 10 times more than, just straight up donating to a church. Because I feel like those people that ask for those kind of donations and stuff like that's just total scam. It goes directly into that pastor's pocket. Nobody sees any good of it. I don't know. I think that's how I feel about it.
Well, that's what's happening in a lot of cases. But please, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt either.
No, you're fine. You probably got a better point to make than I do.
No, I honestly think that there's a case to be made that this is a scam, a legitimate scam, not just, these people are gullible. I mean, I honestly think that this is something that these people think about, and they have an intent. They are trying to scam these people, and I think there's a case to be made for that. And I would be surprised if there haven't been lawsuits on this. I honestly don't know. I haven't looked into it that much. But aside from the John Oliver thing, that was my first experience with anything like that kind of opened my eyes to it. But I don't know. I can't fathom how that couldn't be considered a scam legally in my mind. But
but it's a religion, so all they have to say is, well, this is our faith, this is what we believe. You can't prove otherwise. You can't prove that by giving that money, you're not going to get more goodwill from God. Maybe if you didn't give that money, you would have broken your foot tomorrow. But God, now that you gave this money, saved you from breaking your foot. You know what I mean? Like you can't. There's no legal way to prove that God doesn't interfere in your life.
Well, it's just like we were talking earlier. It's a case of the scammer and the scammy being just as committed to the scam.
Yeah.
Like if you take away like the ability to give money to this scam, then they're going to get really upset about it. So like nobody wins, even though it's kind of a loss for society in general. So What choice do you have other than to let it happen? Huh?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like playing those freemium games, man. It's like, oh, they're free, but really to access the premium features, you need to pay.
Right. Yeah.
But that's really, man, how brilliant is that to prey on people by sending money back to them?
Oh, yeah.
Just give them like, wow, I gave you 10 and you got 5 back. And then maybe they give you 100 and they give you 55 back even, or 60. Like the percentages go up until somebody's like, here's $20,000. And you're like, oh, appreciate that. I'm not going to send any money back this time.
Well, one thing that I wanted to mention with that article before we completely derail this, there's a very interesting thing that they mention over here in the article is the precedent for basically why, pretty much because that's happened before, like secular groups, ACLU, something like that would sue a town that has some kind of a religious symbol on, government property, and usually they would win. And it's because of something called the Lemon test. And it's supposedly some kind of 3-part test that the Supreme Court uses to determine whether this symbol should be allowed to stay or not. Okay, it's something called the lawsuit was Lemon v. Kurtzman. And I'm just reading this directly from the Indy Star, and it says, according to that ruling, the statue or display must have a secular legislative purpose, neither advancing nor prohibiting religious freedom, and must not result in an excessive government entanglement with religious affairs. So, for example, they're given this example here for, I think it was some law in Kentucky that required Ten Commandments to be put in classrooms. In that case, the court concluded that there was no secular legislative purpose for that. Like that was just a purely religious thing. In this case, obviously the court never pronounced anything because they gave up before they went to court. But I feel like it would fail the secular purpose, and potentially even some of the other parts of this, depending on how you look at it. It may be excessive government entanglement with Christianity. You could argue that, but certainly, there's no secular purpose to the cross on top of that tree. Where you could argue, for example, that the tree is decoration.
Yeah, I gotcha. That seems like a reasonable argument or test for it. I mean, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Another interesting case. Oh, go ahead.
There are no qualms in my mind. This was, in my clearly a violation of the First Amendment. That's why they had to back down in the first place. Ken Falk, he's the legal director of the ACLU, and it's not that Ken Falk is some god amongst lawyers and scared the townspeople into submission. It's just the simple fact that there was clearly a First Amendment violation taking place, and he forced the county to comply.
Yeah.
And that's where I stand on it too. I'm 100% back. I 100% back that.
So I was going to give another example. When secular groups or other groups have tried to bring up similar lawsuits, what has happened then? For example, in Oklahoma, the Satanic Temple wanted to put the Baphomet statue right next to a Ten Commandments monument. So basically what they were arguing, and what I think other secular groups argue, is if you're going to allow one religious symbol, you got to allow all religious symbols or none at all. And, in that case, that went to a court decision, and the court decided to remove the Ten Commandments monument, and therefore the Baphomet monument wasn't allowed either. So it was, okay, well, we're not going to allow anybody to display any religious thing on government property. What do you guys think of? Would you guys prefer a more, well, we're not going to display any religious symbols on government property, or would you prefer more of a, let's allow everybody to display their religious symbols equally? Just an opinion. I'm not leaning any way at this point in time, but I'm curious what you guys think.
You really can't let everybody express their religion, because then you're going to get the penis monster or something like that. It's going to be one of them, just as a pure joke, and nobody's going to want to see that. So you can't let anybody do it, unfortunately. That's my
So
opinion.
you have more of a practical argument. Okay.
Well, I would put a penis monument up. Okay, so anyway, yeah, that's my point. That was a joke, by the way.
Of course.
No, I'm right. I'm 100%. I back that First Amendment 100%. I think that the way that it's phrased is appropriate and it works wonderfully, so long as each state abides, but most don't.
Yeah.
That's really what it amounts to. Is the law itself is fine. It just comes down to usually a county level, or a state and county level, where where the amendment gets violated, and that's what it really amounts to. And I think that just getting rid of all the religious symbology and all that from anything that's paid for via tax money is where it should be and ought to be. And that's the way it's supposed to be. It's the way that it was written in the law. It's just violated.
Yeah, I would think that, I don't know for sure, obviously, but speculating here, that them putting the cross up on the tree was not like them actually violating the law on purpose. Like, they probably just didn't realize it when they did it. And I would imagine a lot of that stuff is like that. And then the law gets brought into the situation. They're like, oh, we can't do that. But I don't know.
If I may be so bold, Christians have enjoyed way too much leniency here in this country, and only because they're the dominant religious population. So I think it's about time we remind them of what equality feels like.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, for example, when you look at, often there's been cases where, Christian groups have tried to distribute Bibles in school and all that. But, since they allowed the Bibles, the school had to allow like the Quran to be distributed, and then everybody basically loses their mind over that as soon as they see that. And, people have to realize that in a classroom of, 20 kids, if the averages, of these Pew researches that we've cited earlier hold true, out of 20 kids, you have at least 6 that do not identify as Christian. And, those 6 kids, how are they supposed to feel? They feel marginalized. They feel like their religion isn't as important, or lack thereof. They get figures of authority pushing this stuff on them. And at that early young age, figures of authority are very important. You absorb all that knowledge from these figures of authority. You basically, like, that's all you go to school for is, you listen to the figure of authority and you absorb everything they say.
Right.
Well, those 6 kids are constantly being bullied by all their fellow classmates, so why not have them get bullied by the authority figures as well? I mean, come on, it's a package deal, man.
Yeah. Well, there's all the horror stories, when some kid doesn't want to obey the religious part of something they do in school, and then they get bullied, they get ostracized. If they're like, there's been kids on like the volleyball team or the basketball team, and they didn't want to participate in the group prayer, and that gets spread out throughout the school, and now they're completely ostracized. They get threats, they get all this stuff. So that's part of the reason why we should keep religion out of these things, because these things do happen, and it's tragic when they happen. And like, families have had to move because of that kind of stuff. I hope that doesn't happen to anybody out there, but if it does, there's ways to deal with it. And unfortunately, it usually comes down to weird lawsuits and feelings being hurt and people protesting, where if we just kept that stuff out of the school, it would have been all okay. For some people, it's just not enough that they go to church every Sunday and they listen to an hour, 2-hour sermon. They feel like they need to push that stuff even in the schools for whatever reason.
I simply think focused, and obviously not completely centered around Christianity. I, for one, am an advocate for. I know we're probably going to have an episode about this in the future, but I'm an advocate for actually having a religious course in school. That's mandatory. So I don't even necessarily know how I feel about these people handing out Bibles and Qurans at school. To me, it's just literature. As long as they're not forcing these kids to read it, I don't really see the problem giving them a book. But that's just me. I don't know where you guys stand on that.
I haven't really put much thought into it. This whole conversation, especially what you were saying, reminds me of my daughters in Girl Scouts. And part of Girl Scouts is like pledging, making a pledge at the beginning, and one part of that pledge is to God.
Oh,
yeah. And I'm just like, why do you got to put that in there? But, I'm not really willing to be a martyr for the cause right now.
Yeah,
so
it's not worth it. Yeah,
I enjoy Girl Scouts, and my daughter gets a lot out of it. It seems like a trivial thing, but in some ways, it's not a trivial thing.
Yeah.
You could see how for certain children, this kind of just giving in to the majority when something's wrong, you can build that kind of habit pattern into a kid. So I don't want my kid to have that, but I guess you got to find out what line you're going to draw.
Yeah. And, if you think that there's more benefit to participating in that organization and, saying the God part is a small price to pay, I'm totally fine with that. I'm not, if I had kids, I think I would be okay with that, but I would definitely discuss it with my kids and explain that, look, this is just a saying, we don't have to believe it. Maybe I'll preface it a little bit with something, but
it's interesting to raise somebody to be ostracized from the popular view at a young age. Like it's just weird to do that because you don't know how it affects them in the long run. I don't know, just me contemplating fatherhood.
Well, the nice part is that I was born with that gift. So, I mean, even before I turned atheist, I was always ostracized. So, yeah, it didn't bother me any. Becoming an atheist was really not any much of a change.
You were born with that gift. That's awesome. I just need to reframe it as a gift.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know. I just hate to see indoctrination and things like that. It's so detrimental to kids. It's such a wrong approach to bringing kids up and all that. But I don't know. It's kind of towards what Caleb was saying earlier. I don't know. I'd be okay with people distributing Bibles in school as long as they also allow other religious texts to be distributed. And if I can go and distribute a Christopher Hitchens, books, if I can just, and as long as it's not pushed by the actual school, if they were to set up a table, somewhere off to the side, and if kids want to go there and they pick up a book or something, they can. They want to talk about that person, they can. But if they're all, if they interrupt class and they're like, well, now kids, let's all go up and pick up ourselves a Bible, and everybody sees who grabs one and who doesn't grab one, and if that happens, I am totally against that.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly if they taught critical thinking in school. But if anybody can just hand out their garbage, then the problem is sometimes that garbage gets eaten and people latch onto it. That's why we have all these crazy religions in the first place. So I don't know. I'd prefer that they didn't hand out anything like that. School was a closed system, and you can't just have anybody coming in and handing information in there. But I mean, then you got the problems of policing that system and making sure it's good. But I prefer more controlled information for children. At some age, that doesn't matter anymore. They got to get whatever information is going to come their way. But certainly don't want anybody doing that in my elementary school or middle school, even maybe in high school, maybe. My opinion.
Where you draw the line on getting them introduced into worldviews and opinions that might make them uncomfortable, as opposed to.
Well, yeah. Well, people just buy into really weird stuff, as grown people. Children, on the other end, they're just as easily prone to it, and they don't necessarily have the tools to fight it yet. So That just bothers me as a parent. I just wouldn't want all kinds of garbage coming at them.
Yeah, that's one thing that I have a hard time kind of or trying to rationalize is I don't even necessarily know what's best for my son. So especially when talking to the public or to people I barely know or even to friends and family about how people should do certain things, such as should we be distributing books and whatnot. I don't know. I just there's so many varying opinions on it, and there's valid opinions on both sides. I for one, I hate to say it, but I think I actually have to disagree with you. I think that the dissemination of information is probably the best thing we can do for kids. And if that means introducing them to religious concepts, especially early on, I think the more religion we teach them, not necessarily the finer details and the dogmas, but just the facts of it. Not the teachings of it, but the facts of it, the histories, the traditions, some semblance of why they do certain things, but not really getting down to the nitty gritty, or especially not teaching it as fact, just teaching the raw facts. I really wish that would happen. That's one of the things that opened my mind up to being an atheist. I honestly never bothered learning about other religions until I was in my senior year of high school. I didn't even know a single thing about a single other religion until I decided to pick up a book and check it out for myself.
Yeah, so you're talking more about like a comparative religious course almost, like where you bring up all the different religions, traditions, all that, all in one course. The only difficulty there would be to make sure that the teacher doesn't, show their religion is the good one and all the other ones is the bad ones, or like that's the finer thing there. But yeah, I'd be totally fine with that as well. Hey, if you bring up Christianity, bring up Islam, bring up Buddhism, bring up all these, let's lay them down. Let's show the origin story. Let's show the how they do saints or like important people, and like those kind of concepts, and the capabilities of the deity. Is it like in Christianity, you have one omnipotent God, so he can do everything, he's everywhere. Where, for example, if you do like Greek mythology, you have different gods with different capabilities, like just comparing all that stuff.
That's the hard part, teaching it and finding somebody who's unbiased and won't preach. I agree with that. I think that the solution to that would be to standardize that as much as humanly possible. But other than that, I don't know what else to do. I just think it's important. Like I said, I never even thought to question really the idea that, say, for example, the loaves and the fishes was that crazy of a story. So you really compare it to some of the other miracle stories from other religions, and you realize these were all just as silly. Why did I think that mine were special? I thought the other outright silly, but I didn't even know anything about them. I just assumed they were silly. And they are, but being able to compare the two made me realize just how silly my own beliefs were. And I think that is something that I want to pass on to my son for sure. But again, I don't know if it's within my right to teach other children that stuff, to force them to learn it. I don't know, but that's just where I'm leaning.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. That's good. Well, I think with that. No. Go ahead.
My mic was muted.
Oh.
But I was going to say it's a really tricky question because for me, like I'm all for the introduction of ideas with critical thinking. But like there's no critical thinking taught in school. My wife is a teacher. We go over this all the time. I didn't learn squat about it.
That is all the time we have for you this week. This has been the Hoosier Humanist Hour. Be sure to check out FreeThought Fort Wayne on Facebook and on meetup.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope your days are filled with logic, reasoning, and the eternal quest for knowledge.